Hi everyone, welcome to my channel. Today I'm sharing with you the 8 cards I made using the Hero Arts June 2019 card kit. This is part 1, which is 4 cards, and all of the cards I created today are with a watercolored background. This month's kit is all jungle themed, and I love that Hero Arts is donating 10% of net profits of this kit to a jungle habitat preservation. With this month's kit, I've also purchased a couple of add-ons. This is the Leaves and Vines Fancy Die, and this one is the Jungle Frame Fancy Die. I wanted to watercolor all of my focal point images, so I've got a piece of watercolor paper. I'm using my Tim Holtz stamping platform to help me stamp out these images. With watercolor paper, sometimes it takes a couple of tries of stamping in order to get a nice outline, and so the stamping tool makes it a lot easier. I am using the Hero Arts Black Intensified Ink Cube from the kit. It is watercolor friendly. And then I'll just go through and stamp out all of those images and color the images off screen. So here's a quick shot of all of my images that I've colored and die cut, and I can start making my cards. For the first set of cards, I am using watercolors to create the backgrounds, and here I'm just taking a piece of watercolor paper. I am taping it down to a wooden board. I'm just using some painter's tape to secure that cardstock in place. And I'm using the die as sort of a guide to know where to place my tape, because that's the die I'm going to eventually use to die cut that panel. For this first card, I'm making a nighttime sky with some shades of black and purple, and all I'm doing is loading up my brush with ink, and then I'm swiping the color across my panel. I'm only using 2 shades. I'm using the black at the top, and I'm using a purple one at the bottom. For the bottom portion of that panel, I'm just using the same ink, just a little more diluted. Once I have a layer of color, I go ahead and dry in between each layer, and that will just allow me to build up and intensify the colors. And then I just continue adding layer by layer, drying in between each layer that I previously added. I do like to allow my panels to air dry, so that last layer of color was just left to dry. After I used the die to die cut that panel, I wanted to create some skies, or some stars rather. And I'm using the Copic opaque white paint, which I've diluted with a little bit of water and a paintbrush, and I'm just splattering that onto the background. I've got the watercolor panel popped up on some fun foam to give it just a little extra stability, and then I'm going to adhere that down to a white card base. Once I have that nice and centered, I can go ahead and adhere that in place. And then I have my little elephant that I've colored and die cut, and I'm attaching him directly onto that panel. The little bit part of the elephant that was sticking past the panel, I'm just adding some fun foam to sort of give it a little extra support. I also created a sentiment by stamping it onto a piece of black cardstock using Versamark ink, and then I white heat embossed it. I trimmed it down using my paper trimmer, and then I can just pop it up on some fun foam and add it into place. So after I was done making this card, I thought the elephant needed a friend, so I took the monkey from the main kit and I popped him up on some fun foam and added him just to sit kind of above onto that sentiment. And that's my first card all completed. For the second card, I'm creating basically a same card that I did before, except I'm using only one shade of blue to create a daytime sky now. So first I load up the brush with ink, and then I add that ink to the top part of the panel, and then just dragging it down using a little more water each time. Once I have that first layer, I can go ahead and dry it, and then I will continue building up the intensity of the colors just by adding a new layer and drying in between. And all I'm doing is swiping the colors straight across the panel. And I think for this panel I probably had about 8 layers of ink added on to really make that sky intense. For this card, I stamped the sentiment directly down onto the watercolor panel using Versamark ink, and then I'm adding white embossing powder, and I can use my heat tool to set that in place. I've got the panel that I've die cut, and I'm popping it up on some fun foam. Again, same layout as the first card, just different colors and different animals. Once I get that lined up and make sure it's center, I can press that into place. And then I've got my little tiger and some greenery. I'm adhering a couple of pieces of the greenery on either side of the tiger. And then I can add my little tiger just by using some liquid glue to adhere him directly into place. And that is my second card all complete. There's a close-up of that card. So for card 3, I'm creating another background, and this time I'm creating a sunset scene using some yellows, orange, and a little bit of red. I've got my watercolor panel taped down to my board to help with the warping, and then I'm just loading up my brush with some yellow. I'm kind of swiping it across. I'm leaving just a little white space in between here and there just for a little contrast. And then I'm swiping in some orange and mixing those up. I did go ahead and dry the first layer. I brought in a little bit of red orange at the top to sort of mimic the sunset sky, and then just continue blending and adding a little bit of orange, a little bit of yellow. There's no rhyme or reason, it's just kind of whatever looks good. Once I had all of those in place, I did allow the panel to completely air dry, and then I cut it down using one of the largest Hero Arts rectangle dies. I'm adhering the panel directly to my card base using some double-sided adhesive, and then I created my own frame using the Hero Arts rectangle dies, and I die cut some black cardstock with those frames. I popped up the frames onto some fun foam and I've added it to my card. And then I took the die from the kit, the branch die, and I die cut the branch out of black cardstock. And I've got that popped up on some fun foam. I'm adhering that to the card. And then my little cheetah is my focal point image. And I've got that somewhat popped up on fun foam, and I'm adhering it to my card. And then my sentiment strip, which I did stamp using Versamark ink and white heat embossed it. Now here I figured the card was missing just a little something. I used the 2 Jungle Vines fancy dies that came in the kit, and I die cut some black cardstock using those dies, and then I'm just kind of adhering those in that left corner of the card, just for a little interest to break up some of that background. And then just for a little bit of sparkle, I'm using some gemstones from my stash to add to a couple of those spots, just to brighten it up a little bit. And that is my third card all complete. For the fourth card, I'm going to be doing a little bit of ink smushing to create the background, and I'm starting with a piece of watercolor paper. I've got my piece of acetate sheet and I'm just scribbling the watercolor on there. I am using the Kiritaki Gansai Tambi watercolors to do all of these backgrounds, and I'm adding one of the blue inks onto the acetate, and then I'm just going to smush that right down onto my panel. And I'll do that a couple of times, I think, and dry some of that first layer, and then I'll go in with a different shade just to create some contrast between the shades. I add a little of the light blue, and then I just continue adding ink, layers of ink, until I'm happy with the end result. I do go ahead and dry the panel in between, adding different shades of the blue, just so they don't start to mix. I've set that panel aside to dry, and I can start working on my border panel. I've used the Jungle Frame Fancy Die, and I die cut a piece of Bristol Smooth cardstock, and I'm just very messy and very loose watercoloring onto this border die, or border. I'm just using a couple of different shades of green, and I'm just scribbling the color on there. Once I have that completed, I go ahead and allow that panel to dry. Here I've cut my background panel to an A2 size card base. I did stamp out the sentiment directly onto that panel, but in the end I changed my mind. Somehow it just gets a little too lost when I add this green border, and then I just go ahead and create a new sentiment and pop that right over it. I do have the border popped up on some foam, and I've added that into place. And then here is where I changed my mind with the sentiment, and I've stamped it onto a piece of black cardstock and white heat embossed it. And then I have my little flamingo. I've got that popped up on some foam tape, and I'm adding that into place. And that will complete my fourth card. So that completes part 1 of the first 4 cards that I created using this month's Hero Arts kit. Stay tuned for part 2, which I will upload in a couple of days. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.